She was scrubbing the third-floor hallway of the Grand Lorimer Hotel on Bourdion Road at 4:47 a.m. when the black SUV pulled into the roundabout below, and a man she had not seen in 11 months stepped out. She did not know it was him yet. She only knew that the marble under her knees was cold, that her cleaning trolley wheel had squeaked all night on the west corridor, and that room 312 had left 3 used towels on the bathroom floor and a $2 tip on the pillow. She wiped the baseboard with a rag that had already been washed and re-washed until the cotton had gone soft as old paper. She did not know who had just walked into the lobby, but the man walking through those glass doors had spent the last 11 months looking for her, and he had just checked into the only hotel in Lagos he had not yet searched. Her name was Adese Nwosu. She was 31 years old, and she weighed 108 lb because for the last 9 months she had been sending most of her wages home to her mother in Enugu, who had been diagnosed with a heart condition in September and needed medication that cost 47,000 naira every 3 weeks. Adese wore the standard hotel uniform, a gray polyester dress with a white apron the housekeeping supervisor made them starch by hand every Sunday night. Under the apron, tucked into an inside pocket she had sewn herself, was a small silver locket her grandmother had given her in 2011, 3 days before her grandmother died. The locket held a folded slip of paper. On the paper, in her grandmother's handwriting, were 4 words in Igbo that meant "your name is enough." Adese had read those words every morning for 11 months. She had been a woman with a different life before this. In February of the previous year, she had been engaged to a man named Chukwuemeka Ose, whose family owned a construction company and 3 petrol stations and a house on Banana Island with a driveway long enough for 6 cars. She had met him at a wedding in Cantonments District when she was working as a junior architect at a firm that had been hired to renovate the compound. He had watched her for the entire reception without speaking. 2 weeks later, he had sent her a message that said only, "I would like to know you." 6 months after that, he had knelt on the terrace of his family's beach house at Alashe and asked her to be his wife. And she had said yes because she loved him, and because for the first time in her life she had felt seen by someone whose gaze did not want anything from her except her presence. Then, in June, Chukwuemeka had been called to Dubai for a project that his father said would take 3 months. He had kissed her at the airport at 6:14 a.m. on a Sunday and said, "I will call you every night." And he had, for the first 2 weeks. Then the calls thinned. Then they stopped. Then, one evening in late July, a woman had shown up at Adese's apartment in Lekki Phase 1 with a photograph and a phone number and a story about Chukwuemeka's life that Adese had not been prepared to hear. The woman had been very calm. She had said, "I am not here to hurt you. I am here because you deserve to know before you sign anything." And she had sat on Adese's couch, and she had shown her the photograph, and she had explained the 3 years of the relationship that Chukwuemeka had never once mentioned. Adese had thanked her. She had walked the woman to the door. She had closed the door quietly. She had not screamed. She had sat on the tile floor of her kitchen for 2 hours and 13 minutes, and then she had stood up. And she had begun to fold every piece of clothing Chukwuemeka had left in her closet, slowly, carefully, the way her grandmother had taught her, as though the cloth were precious even now. She had placed them in 3 suitcases. She had left them at his family's estate with the gateman on a Monday morning. She had blocked his number. She had returned the ring to his mother in a padded envelope with a handwritten note that said, "I wish him well." Then she had resigned from the architecture firm because the firm's largest client was Chukwuemeka's father, and she had understood that her presence there would become impossible. She had not told her mother, who had spent 41 years cleaning houses in Enugu to put Adese through school. who had celebrated the engagement by cooking jollof rice for the entire street, would not have survived the news along with the heart medication. So Adeze had said only that the wedding was delayed, and she had moved out of the Lekki apartment because she could no longer afford the rent, and she had taken a room in a shared flat in Yaba above a fabric shop, and she had applied for the only job she could find that paid weekly in cash and required no reference from her old firm, overnight housekeeping at the Grand Lorimer, 6 nights a week, from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., for 68,000 naira a month. She had not cried. That was the strange thing. In 11 months, she had not cried once. She had cleaned 1,847 hotel rooms. She had changed 3,694 sets of bedsheets. She had scrubbed 1,847 bathroom floors on her knees, because the supervisor, a woman named Blessing who wore a name tag that said housekeeping supervisor, and who watched them through the security cameras from her office on the ground floor, said that mops did not reach the corners properly. Adeze had learned to move without being noticed. She had learned to smile at guests who did not see her. She had learned that the world had a way of arranging itself so that a woman in a gray polyester dress became invisible even to people she had once sat across from at dinner. She had used this invisibility. She had used it to survive. She did not know that Chukwemeka Ose had returned from Dubai on a Tuesday in April and had gone directly to her Lekki apartment and had found a stranger living there. She did not know that he had gone next to the architecture firm and had been told, coldly, that she had resigned in August without notice. She did not know that he had gone to her mother's house in Enugu, and that her mother, not knowing anything about the broken engagement, had told him she thought Adeze was still at the firm, was still at the apartment, was still his fiancée. She did not know that he had spent 11 months and had hired 2 private investigators and had walked into 43 hotels across Lagos looking for her, because the woman who had shown up at her door that July had been sent by his cousin. And the photograph had been a photograph of Chukwemeka's sister's husband, and every word of the story had been a lie constructed by a family that did not want him to marry the daughter of a cleaner from Enugu. But Adeze did not know any of that on the morning of April the 14th at 4:47 a.m. She only knew that the man in the black overcoat crossing the lobby below had a walk she had seen before, and that her hands had gone very still on the rag against the baseboard, and that she was suddenly aware of her own breathing. The elevator opened on the 3rd floor. She kept her head down. She had learned this. Guests did not want to be reminded that someone had been cleaning while they slept. She heard footsteps on the carpet. They stopped 4 feet from her. She did not look up. She wrung the rag into the bucket. The man cleared his throat quietly, once. Then he said her name. He said it the way he used to say it, the way no one in the hotel had ever said it, with the emphasis on the middle syllable, the way her grandmother had said it. Adeze. She did not stand. She did not scream. She set the rag down on the edge of the bucket. She looked up. She saw his face. She saw that he was thinner than he had been 11 months ago. She saw that he had not slept, not really, in a long time. She saw the small scar above his left eyebrow that she had once traced with her finger on the terrace at Ilashe. She saw all of this in perhaps 4 seconds. Then she looked back down at the bucket. She said, very quietly, in a voice that did not shake, "I am working. Please move to the side of the corridor. If this story is landing on you the way I think it is, subscribe now, because what happens in the next few minutes is something Adeze had spent 11 months teaching herself not to want." He did not move. He knelt down on the carpet beside her bucket. He was wearing shoes that cost more than 3 months of her wages, and he knelt in them without hesitation, and he said, I have been looking for you." She did not answer. She picked up the rag. She began wiping the baseboard again, the same section she had already cleaned twice, because her hands needed something to do. He said, "I went to your apartment. I went to your mother's. I went to the firm." She said, "I know what you did." And her voice, for the first time, cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together and did not let it happen again. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you think I did?" And there was something in the way he asked it, not defensive, not angry, but genuinely confused. The way a person asks a question when they truly do not know the answer, that made her stop wiping the baseboard. She stood up. Her knees ached. She had been on them since 9 p.m. She walked to her trolley. She put the rag in the plastic bin on the lower shelf. She turned around. She said, "A woman came to my apartment on the 23rd of July. She showed me a photograph. She told me about the 3 years, and Chukwuemeka's face, which had been composed until that moment, went completely still. His hands, which had been at his sides, came up slowly to his mouth. He stood there in the corridor of the Grand Lorimer, and he did not speak for what felt like a full minute, but was actually only 19 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "Adeze, that photograph." What did the man look like? She described him. Chukwuemeka closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, and he said, "That is my sister Nkechi's husband. That is Emmanuel. He has been married to my sister for 4 years. The photograph you saw was from their wedding." And the corridor of the Grand Lorimer at 5:04 a.m. on a Wednesday in April became very silent. She did not believe him. Not immediately. She had spent 11 months building a life on the certainty of what that woman had told her, and certainty is not a thing a person surrenders in 20 seconds. She looked at him. She said, "Who sent her?" And Chukwuemeka said the name of his cousin, a man named Obinna, who worked in the family's construction company and who had told Chukwuemeka's father, on the night of the engagement, that a woman whose mother cleaned houses in Enugu could not be brought into the Osai name. Adeze walked past him. She walked to the end of the corridor. She stood at the window that looked out over Bordillon Road, where the first gray light was beginning to touch the palm trees along the median. She held her hands against the glass because they had begun to shake, and she did not want him to see. She thought about the tile floor of her kitchen in Lekki. She thought about the 2 hours and 13 minutes she had sat there. She thought about the padded envelope she had left with his mother's gateman. She thought about the phone calls she had not answered from a number that had turned out to be his, from a satellite phone in Dubai, before he had come home. She thought about her mother in Enugu, who did not know any of this, who still thought the wedding was delayed. She thought about 11 months of scrubbing bathrooms on her knees. She turned around. She said, "Why did you come to this hotel?" He told her. His investigator had found her name on the housekeeping payroll of the Grand Lorimer 3 days ago. He had flown from Dubai to Lagos the same afternoon. He had gone first to her flat in Yaba, but her roommate had said she was on the night shift. He had come here at 4:30 a.m. because he had not been able to wait until morning, and because he had been afraid that if he waited, she would disappear again. Adeze looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You should not have come at 4:30 a.m. It is against hotel policy for guests to speak to housekeeping staff during shift hours. If Blessing sees us, I will be dismissed." And Chukwuemeka almost laughed, because it was such an Adeze thing to say, to worry about the rules of a job she had taken to survive a betrayal that had not happened. But he did not laugh, because he understood that the sentence was the only way she could hold herself together in that moment. He said, "Then let me wait downstairs until your shift ends." She said, "My shift ends at 6:00. He said, "I will wait until 6:00. She said, "And then what?" And he said, and this is the sentence she would remember for the rest of her life, "And then, I would like to buy you breakfast. And I would like to spend the rest of my life apologizing for a family I could not control. And if at the end of that breakfast you tell me to leave, I will leave, and I will not come back." Then he walked to the elevator. He did not touch her. He did not ask for anything else. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. The doors closed. She stood alone in the corridor. She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. She walked back to her bucket. She knelt down. She picked up the rag. She began wiping the baseboard she had already cleaned 3 times. At 5:47 a.m., Blessing appeared at the end of the corridor. She was walking fast, and her face was tight, and she said, "A Daisy, my office." Now, a Daisy stood up. She followed Blessing to the elevator. They rode down in silence. Blessing led her past the front desk, past the concierge, past the small door marked housekeeping that a Daisy had walked through 11 months of nights. Inside the office, Blessing sat down behind her desk. She did not offer a Daisy a chair. She said, "There is a guest in the lobby who has requested to speak with you. He says he is your fiancé. Is this true?" And a Daisy said, quietly, "He was." Blessing said, "Housekeeping staff are not permitted to have personal relationships with guests. This is grounds for dismissal." A Daisy did not answer. Blessing looked at her for a long moment, and something in her face changed, and she said, in a voice that was slightly softer, "He has also asked to speak with the general manager and with the owner of the hotel. The owner is on his way." At 6:12 a.m., a man named Alhaji Danjuma walked into the housekeeping office. He was 73 years old. He owned the Grand Lorimer and 4 other hotels in Lagos. He had known Chukwemeka Ose's father for 31 years. He looked at Adaisi, who was still standing in her gray polyester dress and her white apron, and he said, in a voice that was neither warm nor cold, "Miss Nwosu, there is a young man in my lobby who has been sitting in a chair for the last hour and a half, and who has told me a story that I believe. He has asked me for one thing. He has asked me to release you from your shift and to allow him to take you to breakfast. I have told him that this decision is not mine. It is yours." And he looked at her, and he waited. Adaise did not move. She said, "If I go with him, and if at the end of breakfast I want to come back to this job, will you allow it?" And Alhaji Danjuma looked at her for a long moment, and he said, "Miss Nwosu, I have watched the footage from my security cameras for the last 4 months. I have watched you clean rooms that the daytime staff refused to clean. I have watched you fold a guest's shirt at 3:00 a.m. because they had left it on the floor, and you did not want their morning to begin with the sight of it. I have watched you help another cleaner named Constance carry her trolley up the stairs when the service elevator was broken in February. I did not know your name until this morning. But you have a job here for as long as you want one, and if you want to leave it, I will write you a reference that will open any door in this city." And Blessing, sitting behind the desk, looked down at her hands. Adaise walked to the small locker at the back of the room. She opened it. She took out her handbag. She took off her white apron. She folded it slowly, the way her grandmother had taught her, and she placed it on the shelf. She closed the locker. She walked past Blessing without looking at her. She walked out of the housekeeping office. She walked through the small door. She walked past the concierge. She walked through the lobby. Chukwemeka was sitting in a chair by the window. When he saw her, he stood up. He did not walk toward her. He waited. She walked to him. She stopped 3 feet away. She said, "One breakfast." "That is what I agreed to." He said, "One breakfast." And they walked out of the Grand Lorimer at 6:31 a.m., past the black SUV that had been waiting all night in the roundabout. And they walked instead to a small place on the corner of the street that served akara and pap for 900 naira. Because Adaeze had said, "I do not want a hotel breakfast. I want to sit somewhere real." They sat for 4 hours. He told her everything. He told her about the cousin and the family meetings she had never known about, and the woman his mother had tried to introduce him to in Dubai, and the way he had refused every one of them because he had spent 11 months unable to think about anything except the sound of her voice on the phone before the calls had stopped. He told her that his mother, when she had received the ring in the padded envelope, had not returned it to him. She had put it in a drawer in her bedroom, and she had not spoken to Obinna since. And Adaeze told him about the tile floor, about the 2 hours and 13 minutes, about the 1,847 hotel rooms, about her mother in Enugu who still did not know, about the locket, about her grandmother's 4 words. At 10:47 a.m., she said, "I need to think. I cannot decide anything today." And he said, "I know." And he walked her to a taxi. He gave the driver 5,000 naira. He said, "Take her wherever she wants to go." Then he stepped back from the curb, and he did not ask for a phone number, and he did not ask when he could see her again, and he watched the taxi turn onto Bourdieu Road until it was gone. She did not go back to Yaba. She asked the driver to take her to Enugu. It was an 8-hour drive. She sat in the back of the taxi, and she looked out the window at the road, and she thought about 11 months of nights, and she thought about her grandmother's handwriting, and she thought about a man who had knelt on the carpet of a hotel corridor at 5 a.m., in shoes that cost more than 3 months of her wages. She arrived at her mother's house at 9:15 that night. Her mother opened the door. Adaeze looked at her, at the woman who had cleaned houses for 41 years to send her to school, who had celebrated an engagement by cooking jollof rice for the entire street, who had been taking heart medication for 9 months without knowing that her daughter had been paying for it out of a housekeeper's wage. And Adaeze sat down on the concrete step of her mother's porch, and for the first time in 11 months, she cried. Her mother sat down beside her. She did not ask what had happened. She put one hand on the back of Adaeze's neck, the way she used to when Adaeze was a child, and she waited. And after a long time, Adaeze told her everything, and her mother listened. And when Adaeze was finished, her mother said only, "Come inside. I will make you tea. Tomorrow, we will decide what you want." Chukwemeka had thought he had lost her forever. He had not. He had lost her for one more day. Adaeze called him the next evening from her mother's house. She said, "I would like a second breakfast." He was in Enugu by the following morning. 6 weeks later, they were married in a small ceremony in her mother's compound, with 41 guests, and a jollof rice pot that her mother refused to let anyone else touch, and a locket that Adaeze wore under her wedding dress, tucked into an inside pocket she had sewn herself. Obinna was removed from the company by Chukwemeka's father the week after Chukwemeka told him the story. He was not shouted at. He was not humiliated. He was given a letter that said his services were no longer required, and he was told that if he approached any member of the family again, the family's lawyers would be in touch. Chukwemeka's mother, the woman who had kept the ring in a drawer for 11 months, gave it to Adaeze on the day of the wedding, and she said, "I am sorry it took me so long to give this back to you." And Adaeze, who had once left it with a gateman in a padded envelope, put it on her finger and said, "You gave it back at the right time." Alhaji Danjuma attended the wedding. He gave Adaize an envelope. Inside was a letter of reference and a note that said, "You are welcome at any of my hotels for the rest of your life." As a guest. Constance, the cleaner who Adaize had once helped carry a trolley up the stairs in February, attended too. Adaize paid for her ticket. Blessing was not invited. Adaize did not go back to architecture immediately. She started something else first. She used part of Chukwuemeka's family money. Money she had once refused. Money she now took because she had earned the right to decide what to do with it. To open a small foundation that provided legal aid and short-term housing for domestic workers in Lagos who had been dismissed unfairly or who had nowhere to go. She hired Constance to run the day-to-day operations. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped 341 women. Chukwuemeka thought he had come back to find a fiancée. What he had actually done was come back to find a woman who no longer needed him, and who had chosen him anyway on her own terms, in her own time, after one breakfast that had lasted 4 hours and one silence that had lasted a full night on the road to Enugu. That is a different thing. That is a much better thing. Adaize thought she had lost everything on a Tuesday in July when a stranger had shown her a photograph. What she had actually lost was a version of her life in which she had not yet learned what she was capable of surviving. She had cleaned 1,847 hotel rooms. She had folded a shirt at 3 a.m. so that a stranger's morning would not begin badly. She had helped another woman carry a trolley up the stairs. She had done all of this while carrying a locket with 4 words in Igbo that meant "Your name is enough." And when the man she had once loved came back and knelt on a carpet in shoes that cost more than 3 months of her wages, she had not run to him. She had not thrown herself into his arms. She had said, "I am working. Please move to the side of the corridor." Because she had learned, in 11 months, that her name was already enough, whether he came back or not. You can lie to a woman about the man she loves. You can send strangers to her door with photographs. You can build entire stories designed to make her disappear from a family that thinks she is not good enough. But you cannot decide what she becomes on the other side of that lie. Some women disappear. Some women break, and some women take the gray polyester dress and the white apron, and they clean 1,847 rooms with such quiet dignity that the owner of the hotel learns their name from the security cameras before the man who was supposed to love them ever finds them again. The last time Adaize walked past the Grand Lorimer was a Sunday in October. 2 years after she had left it. She was in the back of a car with her husband. She looked out the window at the roundabout where the black SUV had once pulled in at 4:47 a.m. She did not ask the driver to stop. She did not turn her head to look for long. She only smiled, briefly, at nothing in particular, and she rested her hand against the window, and she kept going. If a man you once loved disappeared for 11 months, and then walked back into your life on a morning when you were on your knees scrubbing a floor, would you look up? And if you did, would you go with him? Or would you finish the corridor first, take off your apron, fold it the way your grandmother taught you, and walk out on your own terms? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.